First and foremost, I want to thank everybody for being here this evening. As you know, New Mexico's land grant permanent fund discussion is something that really needs to be valued by New Mexicans. And I just want to thank you all for being here to provide us with your service. I know that it's been a very difficult for everybody out there doing this kind of work, especially virtually. But I just wanted to send a special shout out to the leaders and just thank you all for being here and for doing the work that still needs to be done. Just a special shout out for also having such great, you know, work done for the special session and moving forward. It's just really important that we continue to do the work that we've been doing this whole time, and to keep our momentum so that we can continue to move New Mexico forward. So I want to thank DPBC leadership team for putting this together and getting in contact with all of you. And again, thank you all for being here, because New Mexico needs leaders like you, and without the work being done, you guys make it happen every day. So thank you again for being here.
Thank you, Manny. Yes, we sure appreciate your leadership, Manny, and all that you do for this county and for the party. And you're right, it's very important that we have our wonderful Democrats and that really care about our community, and that you all are out in doing the work that needs to be done to make a difference for all New Mexicans. And the work you're doing right now with early childhood education relative to the Land Grant Permanent Fund is very important work. So thank you all for that. And we're ready to hear more about that. But before we get started, I want to take care of a couple of housekeeping issues. At the bottom, attendees down at the bottom, if you hover over the bottom of your screen, you will see a chat box, and some of you have already started chatting, so thank you all for that. I'd like to welcome Brian Colon, our state auditor. Thank you very much for being here, Mr. Colon, and all the others that are here to participate. And at the bottom also, when you pull up that toolbar, you'll see an option to close, have your closed captions. So you can click on that and it'll show the subtitles for you. And we are also recording this, and it'll be available on our website, bernalillodems.org, as well as on through our newsletter. And so thank you all for joining us for this important discussion. This is why we elect Democrats. This is why we're working so hard right now to get out that vote for November 3rd, on November 3rd, so that we have representation that is truly of, by, and for the people. And these wonderful lawmakers here that you'll be, in public servants you'll be hearing from, are gonna be able to tell us, and you all make me so proud. I can't tell you the amount of pride I have in my heart for each one of you and the work you're doing on behalf of all of us. So I would like to go with an idea that Commissioner Richard had, and have you introduce one another. So let's start with you, Stephanie, if you would, please.
Shucks, man, I should have done a little research. I'm gonna introduce my primo, by marriage, not by blood, Antonio Momaestas, who is the representative from the west side of Albuquerque since 2006. Four. 06, all right. The chair of the illustrious Economic Development, Business and Economic Development Committee.
Commerce Committee.
Commerce Committee. Economic Development and Commerce Committee. Senior well-respected, longtime legislator who basically, if you want to know anything about the history of the Land Grant Permanent Fund, the history of the SIC, this gentleman can like rattle off the numbers off the top of his head. So expert on this very important topic, and just, you know, all around like warrior for more money for early childhood education. And just my esteemed colleague for the 6 years I was in the state legislature. We've gone to battle and we've been allies both. So that's my primo. No más.
Thank you very much. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
Representative Maestas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're joined by Stephanie Garcia Richard, who I'm trying to do some research to trace her lineage back to King Richard. I'm almost there. But Stephanie Garcia Richard has a wonderful perspective on the state of New Mexico. She grew up in Silver City, beautiful Silver City, fighting Colts. And she spent a lot of time in Los Alamos, and her and a group of Los Alamos Democrats really spearheaded the past decade or so, turning that county significantly blue. It was the only red county in northern New Mexico. In 2010, during the largest Republican landslide in our country's recent history, Stephanie actually came within a couple dozen votes of upseating an incumbent Republican, one of the greatest races in recent memory. And then, of course, she became a member of the House in 2012, and I served with her for 6 years. She had the unfortunate task of sitting next to me for a couple of those years, spending long hours struggling together. And then, as we all know, 3 years ago, she ran for a state land commissioner. And the state land office is essentially a $900 billion capitalist enterprise disguised as a state agency. It's tasked with having duties over 9 million acres of land, 13 million acres of mineral rights underneath the land, with a fantastic expertise staff. And she manages that office and done an incredible job. So our state land commissioner, Stephanie Garcia Richard.
Thank you very much. Javier, would you like to introduce Linda? Senator
Yes,
Lopez?
yes. Yeah, it's an honor for me. I'm Javier Martinez, State Representative for District 11, which is near North Valley and the downtown neighborhoods. And I've actually known Senator Linda Lopez for, she probably doesn't remember this, but probably for close to 20 years, which is right about the time that I started getting involved in state legislative, actions and advocacy. And Senator Lopez, is the type of legislator who is truly representative of New Mexico. You know, that spirit of that citizen legislature that is accessible and that is compassionate and that listens. I've never forgotten that. And of course, when I got elected, now I get to do, now I get the great pleasure of working with her and working alongside with her on important priorities like this particular one that we're going to talk about here today. To me, it's always been an inspiration to see Senator Lopez, balance her professional life, her private life, her public life in a way that, I think really truly is trailblazing. And many of us are in our own way trying to live up to the model that she has set forth for the rest of us. So Senator Lopez, former Viking.
Always a Viking.
Always a Viking, okay.
Always a Viking, never a former, right on. But thank you so very much, Representative. And I apologize, I had a little glitch within the system here. But to introduce my colleague, Representative Javier Martinez, he's not just a person who came into politics and here he is. He's been long working as an advocate here in my South Valley with many different organizations and doing the work. I think what is essential for those of us who are here and our other colleagues is that we walk the talk. And Javier has done that for a long time before he came into the legislature, and working alongside you, of course, Javier, and our colleagues here too, has been an honor. you know, it's, I think we are all trailblazers in many different ways, and watching you, Javier, and in the, your debates and the information that you bring to the table, whether it's in committee, the passion you bring when it's on the House floor, or you're in front of our committees in the Senate, it's the passion that you bring. And I think that's what makes New Mexico, New Mexico, is because of our gente and who we are. And again, you know, with your family, we're all balancing that responsibility of how we balance as volunteer legislators. It's trying to balance and do that work, but we're all committed and we're here. So, you know, just honored to be here with my colleagues too. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lopez. I sure appreciate that. Yes. So let's get started with our discussion. We're here to talk about the Land Grant Permanent Fund, you know, its origins, what it's about, how it's been used, and what are the possibilities for change. So let's start with the how did it begin? And Mo, since you've been Senator and Representative Maestas, since you've been pointing out that you're the authority on it, would you fill us in on that?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's a fascinating history. I hope I don't bore you too much, but the you know, we probably should have been a state in the 1850s. We weren't allowed to be, but it was time to become a state, and it was inevitable. So in 1898, Congress, and imagine what Congress looked like demographically in 1898, passed the Ferguson Act, and the Ferguson Act dealt with the lands that the federal government was going to give to the new state of New Mexico that it conveniently acquired 50 years before. But anyway, the Ferguson Act delineated beneficiaries of the land, which at the time was reflective of the territorial government. So there's about 21, 22 beneficiaries, and the Ferguson Act was codified in law, and it laid the groundwork for the Land Grant Permanent Fund to come into effect in 1910, and then we became a state in 1912. And it essentially is a contract with the federal government, that the federal government did not want to be burdened with all these Western states and having to deal with a lack of economy in these Western states. So so in my perspective, the Land Grant Permanent Fund was an investment fund to deal with the revenues based on the state lands. At the time, it was a lot of timber. They anticipated land sales, a lot of grazing. In the 80s, it was natural gas. Well, the past 20 years, it's been crude oil. Oil was discovered in New Mexico in 1927 after the Land Grant Permanent Fund. But anyway, so the state lands were ceded to New Mexico by the federal government. The Land Grant Permanent Fund was an investment account to grow as a result of utilizing these lands and to benefit the people of the state of New Mexico, and to grow an economy so that it's not dependent of the federal government. And then just lastly, and then in 1957, the state legislature created the State Investment Council, which is and that's when the Land Grant Permanent Fund really took off in terms of investments. The Land Grant or the State Investment Council is charged with investing and growing the fund, the investment fund. In 2014, we as the people changed the Constitution to allow State Investment Council to use more overseas investments. There was a 15% cap on overseas investments constitutionally prior to that, which has allowed to have one massive $20 billion investment account where they can move financial capital across international borders with the push of a button. So we get an incredible high rate of return from the investments, as well as an influx of cash from the state land office for leases and mineral rights from those lands. So it's an incredible investment account, and it grows tremendous. The distribution from the Land Grant Permanent Fund is 5 years of the preceding 5-year average, which calculates to about 4.1 in real time. So we're distributing 5% today of what the fund was 3 years ago, which was significantly less. So the fund is growing at approximately 11% a year. The distribution is 4.1% or 4%. And so if you look at the fund as a fund to grow New Mexico, then the distribution is far too low. If you look at the fund as a generational equity fund, that each generation should get an equal distribution, then you would also agree that the distribution is far too low. The current generation is being sacrificed for this mythical future generation, and the fund continues to grow and grow and grow, and we continue to toast its growth every year without touching the distribution. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mo. It's interesting to know, you know, and so it was written into our Constitution, and that seems to be one of the things that makes it a little bit difficult to change, right? It's because it's part of the Constitution. So we'll get into that a little bit more. But the land, I think you, Stephanie, you have some stuff to share with us, right?
Yeah, so along with the land grant permanent fund, and in our Constitution, actually, it's called the school fund. And so if you're looking, you know, for it in the, what is it, Mo, it's Article 12, Article 12, I don't know, schools is Article 12, it may be a different article, but if you're looking for it, you'll see that it's not called the land grant permanent fund every time in the Constitution. And so at the same time that was created, the territorial land office at the time, because as my colleague says, we were not a state then, and then later when we, you know, when we achieved, I guess, statehood, the land office was created, and each parcel of the 13 million acres that Mo was talking about previously was actually assigned to a specific beneficiary that is named out in the Constitution. So this is a map of the surface acres of state trust land and their assignments. And so as you can see, the most prevalent color is this sort of salmon here of the common schools, because the common schools have the most assigned acreage, 90-some% of the assigned acreage.
And what would be considered a common school?
So the common schools, the money that we derive from their acreage is intended for K-12 public education. So the beneficiary or the agency that receives that money on their behalf is actually the PED, Public Education Department. So you might look through here and see that there are a number of sort of like causes, not true beneficiary institutions, but sort of causes that the money goes to. You know, water reservoirs, the Saline Institute research, and so those have a particular recipient agency that derives money not only from the land grant permanent fund, but from any renewable sources of revenue that are generated from their assigned parcels. And then all of that gets distributed directly to those beneficiaries.
So it has to be whoever has that particular parcel gets the,
That's right.
is the beneficiary of whatever comes from that
The
particular.
money raised on that parcel.
On that parcel. And how was it decided that these would be the beneficiaries?
Yeah, I believe that was something that was, you know, a part of those original founding documents that Mo talked about, the Ferguson Act, the Enabling Act, and our state's constitution. It was, you know, it had to do with whatever the public institutions that were sort of important at the time and getting them the financial support they needed, because we didn't have a tax base in New Mexico to generate the money like this land is generated. And let me just state here at the forefront, and Mo did talk about this, you know, these lands that were acquired, the entire state was originally indigenous land. So these lands, they belonged, or I mean, and you know, we use our Western idea of belong. They had indigenous populations living on them for generations when they were sort of acquired or taken over, seized by the federal government, and then assigned to New Mexico. So that's kind of another sort of historic context to really realize about state land.
That's a very important context.
Absolutely, and thank you for raising that, Madam Land Commissioner. You know, I'll also add, common schools have sort of changed in definition, right? Common schools did not include kindergarten until fairly recently. Common schools did not include high school, you know, until relatively recently. And so, you know, when we talk about early childhood education and in the continuum of education, you know, we now know that learning begins at birth, and not when you're 5 and you are at an APS kindergarten, right? So that particular definition has shifted as our own understanding of what these institutions are supposed to be.
So is what, shifting to early childhood education, because that is something that you all have in common, wanting to be able to have the land grant permanent fund benefit early childhood education. So explain to us how you all see using the land grant permanent fund for early childhood education. And if you would tell us why it's important. I think you started touching on that, Javier. Why should we want early childhood education to be something we invest in?
Well, you know, I think let's go with the science first. Over 80% of the human brain develops in the first 3 years. Sadly, New Mexico is not doing much for those first 3 years of a child's life. As of a year ago or so, only 5% of children between the ages of 0 to 3 had access to home visitation programs. Home visitation programs are designed to target young people and their families between the time they're born and even prenatal sometimes, all the way to the age of 3. That's when those programs can be most impactful. And so, you know, when it comes to really transforming not only the education system itself and narrowing the opportunity gap for students of color, 78% of whom are students of color, by the way. If you look at the population of students of children between 0 and 18, 78% are children of color. If we want to narrow the opportunity gap, we have to start even more upstream. We cannot wait to kindergarten, because then we're investing way too much on remediation in the 3rd grade and the 5th grade and the 11th grade, and we hardly catch up, right? If we wait for remediation programs, it's way too late. So the science tells us 80% of the brain develops by the age of 3. The science tells us that if we can avoid remediation, that's a better investment. Now, if we look at the money side, James Heckman, a famous Nobel Prize winning conservative economist from the University of Chicago, will tell us that for every dollar invested in early childhood, the state will receive 13%, back in returns. So the notion of not only investing in early childhood, but investing in big, substantive, permanent ways can really not only help us transform New Mexico in terms of education, but transform New Mexico in terms of our own economy, right? And of course, as these children go through the educational process, as these children are prepared to take on life's challenges, those young people are a lot more likely to be productive members of society, as opposed to being incarcerated, as opposed to being, suffering from drug use disorders or whatever else that might be. So, you know, to us, it makes sense. It's made sense for the last 10 years to make this investment. And you know, quite frankly, I think it's the right thing to do. And before we go here tonight, you know, I've got a whole list of other things that I could talk about, but I want to give my colleagues an opportunity to chime in. But there's also a whole equity aspect to this. Commissioner Garcia Richard alluded to this. This land belonged to somebody else. And that somebody else today, it's at the bottom of every single list. COVID hit this particular population especially hard. Navajo Nation had the #1 infection rate in the country, a couple of months ago. Yet there are investors in Wall Street making a killing, investing a $20 billion fund. So I'll leave it at that and allow my colleagues to chime in.
Thank you for that. And I'd like to have someone talk a little bit about the investment, the State Investment Council.
Yeah,
and
so
how
I
that
actually,
works.
I have a couple of slides, and I know Mo wants to get his 2 cents on the SIC in, so I will give him a chance. And then we haven't heard from our Madam Chair, the esteemed Senate Rules Committee. So I would like to give you some as well. But I do have a couple slides on generational equity, just because that's been mentioned. That is something that actually the SIC has a formula for. So by their very own formula, as you will see in 1 second when I share my screen, the statement that Mo made is actually accurate. We are cheating the future's kids because that fund right now is so high and we are not dipping into it. So this is all available on the SIC website, and someone actually mentioned that in the chat. But if you look over here to the right-hand side, basically we want an intergenerational equity score of 50. 50 means you have the same chance that you are equitably distributing today's distributions and future distributions. Anytime that number goes above 50, you are cheating today's generations at the benefit of future generations. And right now we are at a 79%. If you look down at the next 25 years, here we are here. This is the next 25 years of distributions. You see that the fund continues to grow. That equity, generational equity distributor number actually just gets bigger or stays the same. It does not get smaller because we're not drawing down any more from the fund. I'm actually the very first land commissioner to support additional distributions out of the Land Grant Permanent Fund, because usually it's considered to be sort of not fiscally supportable. We are a fiduciary. The State Investment Council is an 11-member council. Some governor appointees, some public members, myself, as treasurer, sit on the investment council. The governor chairs the investment council, and then the legislature has their appointees as well. And we make decisions like this. How do we want to change the portfolio of where our investments are? We want to make sure that intergenerational equity, and I want you all just to look right here. So these are assumptions on contributions. So that's inflows into the fund from my office. Assumptions on the annual spending rate. So as Mo said, right now the spending rate is set at 5%. So if you see that spending rate keeps us at that 79% on the equity distribution ratio. If we were to increase to 6%, we'd only go down to a 67% intergenerational equity ratio. If we went to a 4%, which is what nobody on this panel wants to do, go backwards, we'd go to an 87% intergenerational ratio. If you want these charts and slides, I can provide them personally, or they are on the SIC website. So as we can see, already we are creating inequity between the kids who need the distributions now and future generations. So that's all I wanted to say on that, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. That's very important there, and it just shows what a complex, deep, and broad subject this is, and it's something that we don't learn about in high school, do we? But we ought to, because it's really important. So, Senator Lopez, what do you think?
Well, first of all, ditto for everything that everybody has said. If you remember, we did go down this road back under Governor Richardson. We did have a constitutional amendment that the people did say yes, and we did draw down an extra amount of money that did go into what we called at that time a lockbox. And those monies were used to support our public school system. They helped, they made a big difference, but over the time it dropped down to where, of course, we landed with no additional monies coming in. You know, and Representative Martinez and Maestas, we've had this discussion in front of Senate Rules how many times already, but it's talking about that whole important issue on equity. In one of our chat and questions that was there, it was mentioned, and that's what I was also going to say too, is I think we have an opportunity at this point in time with regards to the economy. We have a fund that sits here. It's one of the richest funds in this whole country. We are sitting on a top of, I call it the savings account for the state. We need to be able to utilize that. We have a budget deficit that we're coming into this coming session. I mentioned this in another meeting this morning also, that we have other funds that we have set aside besides the permanent fund. We have the water fund. We even established the early childhood fund a couple of years ago under the guidance of our governor, which I'm very happy that we did. But there's always a fail-safe in there. We still draw monies from those funds, the tobacco revenue oversight. If our budget numbers continue to drop and we don't find other revenue, we start taking away from that early childhood trust fund that has been put there. This last special session, we removed 10 million from it. It was slated to move more, but we held good. But it doesn't mean that we won't have to dip more into that chunk of money that we put aside. And it was $30 million, if I remember correctly, for that fund that we put in. Those are things that we also have to be cognizant of in removing just a small percentage that diverts the money to help our early childhood programs, our families. It is an equity issue. It is where we go. I believe that we can also, my hope is that we could even have a discussion on maybe just a little bit more that could go into our public education system to help with the Martinez-Yazzie lawsuit about equity in our public education system. This is a whole endeavor that we're saying from 0 through saying 12th grade. We have in every community in the state of New Mexico. COVID, I think, has actually brought to the attention of many of us as to where the inequities are that exist in our state. It's in healthcare, it's in every aspect. But education, as we know, and this is what we've talked long time, talk with my hands, sorry, but we've talked in committees in the legislature about how we equalize. No, it's about the equity, because equality has a whole different concept. It's the equity that we need to bring to all of our families. And if we're 50th in this country, we have an opportunity to change it. We can change it. We have an opportunity. And that's where I believe I have supported this forever. It's come out of the Senate Rules Committee a few times. And my hope is we get more to the discussion about what I think can happen when the House sends the resolution back to us in the Senate, what can happen.
I'd like to hear that. What would have been or Representative Maestas, you wanted to add something?
No, I think I'm about to. I think I'm anticipating your question, but forgive me. But I just want to thank the senator, because there's only really a handful of senators that have taken a deep dive into the Land Grant Permanent Fund. The House is well versed in it. The House, the past 4 or 5 years, has had 12 hour-and-a-half hearings in committee. We've had 4 3-hour floor debates. Thanks to Senator Lopez, we've managed to have 2 or 3 kind of 45-minute hour hearings in her committee those last days of the session. But the rest of the senators haven't heard this stuff. And so some of the questions we get from even members of the finance team, we're like, no, we answered that in the House like 5 years ago. So just really quick, people think that it's a 5% distribution and that you can't go above 5. It's 5% of the preceding 5-year average. So you take whatever the fund is on December 31st, you take the last 5 December 31st, we go into the session in January, we figure out the math, and then we allocate it for the fiscal year July 1st. And so essentially money is transferred every first of the month from the Land Grant Permanent Fund investment account into the general fund to pay for state government. So it's 12 equal payments throughout that fiscal year. When that last payment is made in June at the end of the fiscal year, it's 6.5 years from the first New Year's Eve data point that we're using. So we're only distributing 4%. Arizona increased their distribution a couple years ago to 6.8. We're merely asking to go from 4 to 5 in real dollars. Also, the argument is that, well, you can't put $150 million, $170 million into this system overnight. We don't have to. The distribution is an earmark. The distribution is a guarantee that that's what the money's going for. We as legislators can appropriate that money or not. So the distribution is an earmark. The appropriation is the permission to spend the money. So if say, for example, if $150 million extra is earmarked for early childhood, and we can't grow that system that fast responsibly, and say we spend $70 million, that remaining 80 million remains in the investment account collecting interest earmarked for early child development. So these things that we know in the House, a lot of the finance members of the Senate, frankly, don't know these things. And so we've not lost momentum. The hasn't been defeated. It simply hasn't been, Javier and I haven't had a chance to engage the soon future chairman of Senate Finance on these issues, which is unfortunate. But we just got to keep the momentum going, and the more education we could do on the fund, then the only conclusion any reasonable person comes to is that we're not using it as wisely as we should, and that we need to increase funding for early childhood and education in general, because it pays off more in the future. That's what just irks us tremendously is these investments just aren't being made smartly. They're made in global stocks. And lastly, the resistance, there's just this inherent resistance not to touch any aspect of the fund. We haven't intellectually engaged our colleagues that much. There's just this stubborn resistance to it. Every time we answer every concern, they just get flustered and don't know. But we have to kind of overcome that. Why is there 21 beneficiaries? I did a bill to remove the prisons as a beneficiary, and everyone in the committee, like, how dare you do that? Those are our founders. That's our Constitution. But we can't let Congress in 1898 dictate how we appropriate our money in 2020. And like Javier, is so articulate in reminding us that 70% plus of these children that would benefit from the fund are children of color, and many in horrible economic situations, being handcuffed by a Congress, an all-male white Congress of 1898. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was gonna I think transition a little bit too into the conversation of what's holding us up, and in the chat box I pasted a link to an op-ed that I wrote a couple months back to the Journal. George Floyd's daughter said, young daughter I should add, that her daddy had changed the world, and I believe that. I think her daddy did change the world. The fact that he was murdered in the way that he was murdered, I think, gave a new level of consciousness to our country with regard to race and racism, and it had this domino effect that I hope will continue. And New Mexico has not been immune to that. We have seen thousands of people, young and old, black and white, Latino, Native American, immigrant, and otherwise, take to the streets, and to remind us that our country is far from being that perfect union, and that there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Our governor has called a council on racial justice together, comprised of experts and community members from across the state. There's a civil rights commission that we created during the special session to look at issues specifically of criminal justice and police reform in New Mexico. As these things were happening, I realized that for the last 10 years that this effort has been in front of the legislature, long before I was a member of the legislature, I might add. Senator Lopez and Representative Maestas have been working on this longer than I have. But it came to mind that, in fact, there's so much work to do. And it came to mind the fact that we've never made the argument. And I don't know why we've never made the argument. The fact that a committee like Senate Finance can single-handedly keep the debate from even happening. The fact that politicians on both sides of the aisle, and really Republicans don't control the legislature, it's Democrats, who have stood in the way of making a very responsible, very small increase in investment for these kids. And by these kids, I remind us, 78% of them are children of color. it really motivated me and pushed me to write the piece that I wrote. And a year ago, I probably wouldn't have written that piece. I probably would have been just uncomfortable going there. But the murder of George Floyd, the words of his young daughter, really inspired me to contextualize this fight. This fight is no longer about more pre-K for students. It irks me when politicians are running for office and they say universal pre-K, as if that's going to fix it. It's not going to fix it. It's one piece of it. You need to go beyond the pre-K. The pre-K begins at 3. 40 years ago, on average, a New Mexican kid would have 15, 16, 20 meaningful adult relationships. You hear all the time, I grew up poor in northern New Mexico and I came out fine. Yes, because you had all grandparents and uncles and aunties and your priests and your teachers all lived in the neighborhood. Today, on average, a kid in New Mexico has 1.5 meaningful adult relationships. And that's before the pandemic. So, as we move forward in these discussions about the Land Grant Permanent Fund, we have to remember what the land commissioner stated earlier. This was land that belonged to people who are suffering the most right now. We have to remember that the federal government did not want us to become a state. They refused to allow us into the union because we were too Mexican, we were too native, we spoke too much Spanish. And then once we became a state, after many years of battles, and you can look at the congressional record, you can see what those Congress white men said about why we shouldn't become a state. And then once they allowed us into the union, what they did is they tied our hands behind our back with archaic finance and land management systems that persist today. And that the good folks at the SIC and the Senate Finance Committee and previous governors have just held dear because the forefathers wanted it that way. So, as we move through this campaign season, as we prep for the 21 session, my position, and I don't speak for anybody else on this panel, but my position is that if you oppose a responsible increased investment in these specific services and programs for these particular set of students, you are in fact upholding archaic and oppressive and racist systems of oppression, whether you're Republican or whether you're Democrat. And you will be called out for it. Because what we have experienced in the last 6 months, a pandemic that is taking brown and black lives, and that's without the cops killing us, is no longer acceptable. And for the constituents who sent me to Santa Fe, they didn't send me to shake hands and collect pins and go to lunch with lobbyists. They elected me to fight for them. And to me, this is the fight of our generation. The fact that the prisons get $20 million a year from the Land Grant Permanent Fund, but children between the ages of 0 and 5 don't get anything, should tell us all that we need to know. So as you can tell, this comes from a deep, deep place in my heart. And as our work continues over the next 6 months to elect not only Democrats, but good Democrats to the state legislature, and as we push forth the idea of investing this permanent fund in our children today, we will be talking about race, and you will be forced to answer for your opposition to this. 1% does not kill the fund. They will tell you that. They will say, well, you're gonna kill the fund. Future generations will not have it around. That's not true. That is not true. If we were asking for 10%, maybe that's true. 1% is not true. One last thing I'll say. In 2002, Governor Richardson succeeded in increasing the distribution from the Land Grant Permanent Fund. Also in 2002, as reported by the Albuquerque Journal on February 14th, 2002 to be exact, there was a press conference with Governor Richardson and Democratic leadership on the House side for sure. I don't know about Senate. And Governor Richardson said, today I'm giving the people of New Mexico a Valentine's Day gift. What did he do? And what did the legislature do? He didn't do it, the legislature did it. They cut taxes for the wealthiest New Mexicans in half. At the same time, they increased the distribution from the Land Grant Permanent Fund. The effective result of that was supplanting funding. As we blew a huge hole in our state budget because we cut taxes for the wealthiest, we took more money from the permanent fund to fill the hole. So we must remember that mistake from the past, and we must remember not to make it again. Thank you.
I think I could just listen to you for hours, Representative Martinez. Thank you. Thank
know,
you.
I wish he had a mic to drop. He needs a mic.
Oh my God.
Yes.
You know, and these are conversations that we do have in the legislature. The House has had it. We've had it in our meetings where we're planning about the resolution that needs to come forward. But you know, there have been some roadblocks in the legislature, and it's been in my chamber in the Senate. And you know, the usual venue that it goes through is the House assigns bills to certain committees. When the measure comes over to the Senate, if it's had its thorough hearing, which they do, then usually we try and just do one committee hearing in the Senate. But there's always an opportunity where you might get an assignment to Senate Finance Committee. But what I will tell you, and most of us know here also, is that what's important are the committee assignments that are made to the different committees in the legislature. It's both in the House and the Senate chambers. As chair of the Senate Rules Committee for all of these many years, my membership has changed. We've had some progressive members, and then we've had some not so progressive members. And the ones that I've had for the last years have not been amenable to letting the bill get out of Senate Rules Committee. We've tried a few times with a few amendments where we drop, you know, we've accepted the amendment with a corazon that says, but at least it got out of committee a couple of times if they reduced the amount to be distributed. But regardless of that, if the bill comes out of Senate Rules Committee and it goes to Senate Finance, that's where the roadblock has always been. And, you know, Senator Smith has been the chairman of that committee for several years, not forever, because we've had several chairs who've come and you know, have moved on. But when you have a chair who doesn't allow even a conversation to be held in the committee, that to me is something that we don't do. We should not be doing. It's not the legislature who's making the decision on the 1%. This still goes to the people of the state of New Mexico. It still comes to us as the voters to make the decision. Do we say yes to approve this or no? So it's not even us as the legislature that makes the final decision. It comes up to us as the voters. And for us not to be willing to let the voter, who I believe is the smart, we have smart voters who are out in our communities, to not allow us as voters to do so is insane in many aspects for my words that I use. But I do believe that now we have an opportunity coming in this legislative session. We can elect Democrats from these different communities, especially for the senators who lost their election, and we know who they are. We elect those senatorial candidates to be elected and come in and join me in the Senate. We change the committee structure. We can change the chairmanships of the committees. That's an opportunity that avails itself. And you also make sure who you put on the different committees to make sure certain bills are able to get out. So, you know, that's part of the process. And my plea here is for all of us as Democrats is to please get out and support those Democrat candidates. For the House, yes, but for my senators, please. We need to have our senators who are in support of, who understand the issues that are in front of us, who are not going to hold that line with regards to this issue on equity. As Representative Martinez said, our history, go back and learn our history in the state of New Mexico. Look as to what they called us. Look as to how we have been treated over these years. And look who made up the majority at that point in time. It didn't look like those of us who were here on, you know, pictured right here this evening. It was a whole different context. And I believe that we can make the difference, but I am asking you to please get out and support those candidates that will make the difference and give us the vote that we need for this fund, but for other initiatives that we need to change who we are and what we are doing for our families in the state of New Mexico. So
Thank you for that, Senator Lopez. And we do have some candidates on that are attending tonight. So if you would please put your websites in the chat so people know who you are and know to support you. And you can also go to bernalillodems.org. We have all of our Democratic candidates featured there with the item we call Focus Forward. So one of the things I would like to ask is a question that came in from Jay Wilson. And he says, just looking at explicit purposes of what and who public land funds go to, can you explain why the revenue of these public lands haven't seen any Native tribes listed as direct beneficiaries?
Yeah, that's a great question, and actually was raised in the chat as well. I'm sure my colleagues want to weigh in, but I just want to say that at the time that the beneficiaries were named, they were institutions. They were public institutions and public agencies. What we are doing at the land office now in this kind of 180 change from how a land office has ever functioned with a woman at the head of the agency is going to tribes to say, you know, are there lands that you are interested in swapping with us? You know, we are repatriating many of these acres that are near tribal borders. And so we do have a tribal land swap that includes about 4 communities throughout the state interested in repatriating their land. I just did want to also add, though, that the money that we're talking about in terms of additional distributions, additional inflows into early childhood education, which, by the way, we need more for K-12, but a quality early childhood education will help K-12 on its own, even without an additional distribution to K-12. I mean, that's, I'm a former 3rd grade teacher. I mean, you know, what the child comes to the classroom door with, you know, that's a lot of times you're doing a lot of remediation, a lot of catch up. If you had children coming to 3rd grade who had early childhood, you wouldn't have such a need for the remediation. So I just wanted to say that this money we're talking about, the additional distribution, and these gentlemen, I mean, people talk about them as though they're radical. They are so freaking conservative. 1% is truly, come on. They've bent over backwards in terms of just, you know, trying to make it palatable, I think, for fiscal conservatives, but really they're not breaking the bank on this proposal. This proposal is completely sane and sound by any fiscal measure. Like I showed you before, the SIC's very numbers say that we are not being equitable between generations. So I just wanted to say that while there is no particular beneficiary named out that is a tribe, most of the beneficiaries are state agencies. Native children, Native families, Native communities would benefit tremendously from an increased distribution for early childhood education.
Mo, what do you think about that, the 1%?
The 1%, no, great point. I mean, why 1%? I mean, so I've been working with the economics department at UNM. They published a white paper suggesting that it was a wise investment, that 1% was a wise investment. These are conservative economics professors. And the math department is trying to come up with a number. If in fact we wanted generational equity, what is the magic number? It's probably about 7.3, 7.5 maybe, if we wanted to, you know, what's that magic number that every single generation gets equal? I don't think that's the point of the Land Grant Permanent Fund. It's a development fund. How do we as human beings utilize the state lands through the leadership of the state land commissioner to grow our economy and increase our quality of life as human beings on this earth? We have $20 billion staring at us in the face with clear scientific research that early childhood does just that, you know, makes us full-fledged human beings. And So natives, limited English speakers, at-risk youth, we're underserving them from a constitutional standpoint. So this is key to solving the concerns of the Yazzie Martinez plaintiffs. And so just some couple quick thoughts is fiscal conservatism has been twisted. It's not spending less, it's spending wisely. To be fiscally conservative is to spend wisely. We're not spending wisely, investing in global stocks. We could also, there's nothing that precludes the SIC from investing locally. Now, granted, they have a fiduciary duty to grow the fund, so they're going to go with better investments, but that doesn't preclude them from looking at every opportunity to invest locally, because if we were to invest locally, we get more bang for the buck. The fund grows through financial means, and we get those capital dollars here in New Mexico. But I think it comes down to what's a huge problem in our state, which we have to fight against, is this scarcity mentality. Poverty, generations of poverty beats down on folks. I think, the future former chairman of Senate Finance embodies the scarcity mentality of the world's going to end and we need to save this money for the future generation of poor people, as opposed to solving the problems that cause poverty and dysfunction and domestic violence in the home, alcoholism, substance abuse. We were accused by the Journal of trying to raid the fund, and this is right what Javier nails on, is that to raid something is to take something that's not yours. They don't think it's ours. It's our land, it's our oil, it's our state, it's our land grant permit fund. Send it to the voters and let the voters decide what to do with their funds. It's not somebody else's fund. And it's certainly not somebody's fun to be so paternalistic about that you stand in front of the schoolhouse door, not allowing people to vote on it. So you're right. When we go back in January, hopefully we can determine what is in fact the best way to invest it. I think we've been hammering away at the 1% so long that we may be stuck in that commitment, but nothing precludes us from doing what Richardson did. They went from 4.7 to 5.8, and then it went back down to 5. I think there's a tremendous need to bounce it up and then maybe ratchet it back if the numbers deem appropriate. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Mo. So, Linda, it goes through the House. It's been stuck in committee, not even being able to come to the floor of the Senate. Is that correct? And then, so should this next session, we get it out of committee, it goes to the floor, and you do your beautiful work there, then it goes before the voters and we get to vote on it and the distribution changes. And someone asked, I believe it's one of our elected officials, about any ideas about the Finance Committee, who may be chairing this next session.
Well, again, that's still to be determined. We still have to see the outcome of the election. As it is, the House, of course, has their structure that they use for leadership. In the Senate, we will have our election of leadership also, and that's from the pro tem for the Senate itself, the president pro tem, and then you also have a majority floor leader and the floor majority whip and the majority caucus in the Democrat party and our party. But after the elections are done, we then meet with the Republican leadership that they elect, and there's what is called a committee's committee. And in committee's committee is where the determination of who sits on committees, and if there's a general consensus on leadership that is being appointed by the pro tem. So it's still to be determined as to who, where, or what's going to happen on all of that leadership at this point. But that's why I made the plea. We need our Senate Democrat candidates to please be supported, because that will help to change the way that we set up the committee's committee structure. Because the committee's committee also makes a lot of determinations on bills, if they're germane or not. They have a lot of power within that small group of people. And that needs to change so that we have diversity and we really reflect the will of the people in what we do in the Senate. So we won't know who the chairwoman may be of different committees, but that'll be determined right after the new year. And
And
for
one of the steps that we did miss is that it has to go before the governor to be signed, and
No.
no? No?
No.
Okay.
no, the House sends it to us, the Senate, we're going to get it through this session, and it goes out to the voter.
The governor gets to
That's
vote
what
on
I
it
have to do.
at the
I'm
election.
sorry? What, Mo? I'm sorry?
The governor gets to join us on election day voting for it.
Oh, yeah.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. If
Well,
I may add a piece,
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
if I may add a piece, you know, as Senator Lopez is talking about leadership, you know, it's sort of the name of the game, right? As senators and reps get elected, and then they vote for their own leadership structure. But something that every single activist on this Zoom can help us do, and I'm not going to say the name because I want to protect their process, but I'm in the process of seeking an endorsement from somebody in our congressional delegation, and you know, they know me, they've known me a long time, but I still have to go through the process. And there was a set of questions that I had to answer. The very first question: what is your position on investing an additional percentage from the Land-Grant Permanent Fund for early childhood? Every single activist on this Zoom, whenever you get a call for money from one of these candidates for Senate, state Senate, whenever you get an email asking you to volunteer, ask them, what is your position on the Land-Grant Permanent Fund? And if you get you're not going to get a no, given the people who won the primary. But if you get any sort of like, well, I don't know, I'm still thinking about it, I don't know enough about it, you now know everything you need to know about it through the Zoom call. Educate them and get them on the spot. We don't need any more Democrats who are going to oppose this, because again, there's no reason to oppose it. There's no real reason to oppose this.
Thank you for that. Thank you. One of the questions that came up in the chat is about a public bank using part of the fund for a state bank. But how is that possible? What would that look like? What would it take to make that happen? Mo, do you have?
Yeah, no, thank you. So there's going to be I've done a couple memorials. South Dakota or North Dakota has a public bank, and it works fantastic for them. In fact, the public bank's ability to deal with the economic downturn as a result of COVID in that state was tremendous. Their economy did not dip at all, but no other state has done it. And, you know, because when you propose something like this, there's, you know, tons of bankers in the room convincing you that's a horrible idea. It has momentum. A lot of the new folks on this Zoom are susceptible to it. But if we were to have a state bank, theoretically, they could take over some of the responsibilities of the State Investment Council. The bill that's being contemplated now doesn't do that. But we have, we have tremendous, the state has to put its money somewhere, and it puts it in private banks. So a state bank may be the way to go. But as contemplated now, it's not, the bill, as I've seen, does not propose to take over SIC responsibilities. But theoretically, it could. I mean, we're lawmakers. We make the laws, we can change these institutions, but to do something like that, there's just such a rigidity in New Mexico to change that it's become almost stubborn. That any proposal dealing with the Land-Grant Permanent Fund, there's just this stubbornness that we cannot persuade them. We have to defeat them politically. We have to, I don't want to change their mind. I want to change their job. And thanks to all the great campaigners out there, we've changed some of their jobs.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the first few times that I attended the State Investment Council meetings as a member, and just this incredible emphasis on fiduciary, because we are fiduciaries by statute, we are fiduciaries by the Constitution, and we have legal obligations to be fiduciaries. But it really, it doesn't rely on things like sustainable investment. It relies on things like rate of return and whether or not you're growing in your investments. So this whole idea of, you know, are our investments even, do they match our values? You know, the state legislature passes bills on criminal justice reform, and we're investing in private prisons with the SIC money. I mean, you know, it's a big disconnect between the values that New Mexicans hold and where our money is. And that's considered to be fiduciarily responsible. Nobody wants to talk about where, you know, the fact that we use our state's resources to prevent, say, immigrants that are being detained from making phone calls because they have to, you know, go through a system where they may collect calls. The money to administer those programs comes from investments from the SIC. There's been questions I've seen in the chat and the Q&A about investing in New Mexico, investing in renewable energy. The limits on investment are not many. I think they were already mentioned. There's a limit on overseas investment that the legislature took under consideration. But the legislature has actually had to come in and direct the SIC to say, you shall invest more in New Mexico private equity, New Mexico owned businesses. You shall invest more in renewable energy projects because there's a reluctance, there's a real reluctance, and you know, it's whether you call it fiscal conservatism, whether you call it you know, your own definition of fiduciary obligations, there's a real resistance to any kind of digging into where our money goes, whether or not we are benefiting the people of New Mexico. It is all about rate of return and growing the fund. Yeah. And it's incredibly frustrating. I want to grow that conversation. I want to give it more context, and you all can help do that. In fact, there is a State Investment Council meeting on Tuesday.
And they're broadcast live.
They are, yeah. We have them by telephone these days because we don't meet in person, but they are available on the State Investment Council YouTube page.
Yes, you can find that online. And if you could please talk a little bit about the structure, the board versus the members and
versus the staff.
Versus
so
the staff.
Right, so there's an agency. The State Investment Council is an agency, a state agency. There's a little bit of disagreement about who is actually responsible for the investment. But those of us on the board, the appointed board, you know, have the notion that it's the State Investment Council board. So it's the 11 members that I talked about. And just there's some questions about who appoints members. So there are 2 public members. That is myself. So whoever holds the position of land commissioner is automatically on the State Investment Council. The governor is automatically the chair of the State Investment Council, and then the state treasurer. So those are the public members. Then the legislature, I believe, gets two appointees. So legislative leadership, I'm presuming, Leg Council names their appointees to that board. And then the other 6 are governor appointees and have to meet certain criteria. So there has to be someone from the beneficiary institution. So right now we've got someone, I believe, from CNM on the board. There has to be someone who represents, there are various requirements named forth in the appointment of these folks, but that's how they're chosen. And so, yeah, I mean, it is basically, you need 6 votes to change anything. So folks on this chat are absolutely right. The council controls it, and you need 6 votes on the council to make a change.
No, thank you, Commissioner. And of course, the board oversets the policy, but then there's the agency, the state employees. And with it, it's not in-house investments. We don't have, in my opinion, we should hire 10 investors, pay them a heck of a lot and have them do the investments. We don't do that. We hire outside investment firms from Chicago, New York, all over, and they make huge amounts of money in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And we don't have a clear idea of how much money they make because it's all residual based on how much money is invested. So it's not a line item in the budget, you know, but the question remains, does the Constitution allow land grant permanent fund money to be used to pay investors? You know, I would suggest that it doesn't, but that's one of the many little struggles that we're engaged in.
Yeah, a lot of good information, a lot of complex information. And as far as investment and return on investment, as you all have pointed out, early childhood education from the womb to the time of entering elementary school provides a great return on investment. And so it's a matter of changing that mentality. And it sounds like changing the mentality in different places, right? The legislature, we're going to need the public to be informed when it gets to us voting on it. And but as far as what the state investment council does is they just follow whatever the laws are that come out of the legislature or what come out of this, right? So they don't stop what's happening so much as make it happen, right? They're just investing the money or overseeing the investment of the money.
And someone asked, what is the governor's position on this issue? She campaigned side by side with me on this issue. She came to a Senate hearing with her grandchild on her lap on this issue. You know, there was a compromise to create the Early Childhood Education Fund, another investment fund that the State Investment Council invests in, but I mean, that's peanuts in comparison with what we're talking about with the Land Grant Permanent Fund and its ability to fund all these various things. And I just wanted to add, when we say early childhood education, that's a little bit of a short a nickname for a plethora of things. I mean, we are talking birth to the kindergarten classroom door. I mean, that's, you know, it includes home visiting, it includes childcare, it includes you know, a whole number of things. So we say early childhood education, usually people think pre-K, but it's really a whole host of services.
And it could even be prenatal, as I think Representative Martinez pointed out, when we used to have our tias and abuelas and everybody who's living in these communal areas, we had that assistance to learn how to be parents. And so I think it's a education on parenting from conception, prenatal on that. So, yeah.
Sure. And, you know, one of the things that the opponents have said, or that they will say, is that we've increased our investments in early childhood, you know, by quite a bit the last few years. And that is true. You know, these increased investments actually started under the Susana Martinez administration. Again, as our policy was catching up with the science, increased investments have been made. However, given the generations of children that we've ignored, you know, to put it lightly, and given the conditions that many of these families live in now, and that intergenerational poverty that has been created by our state policies, you know, what we've been funding, which is sort of a few more pre-K spots every year, a few more childcare spots every year, a few more home visitation spots. You know, you cannot fix intergenerational poverty with a few bucks here and there. That's why we've been pushing for this large investment, right, into the system so that every child, every family has access to it. So, you know, the Early Childhood Trust Fund, which was sort of like this grand compromise, you know, one of the sponsors was Senator John Arthur Smith. We've got to remember, number one, it's supposed to be a $1 billion trust fund. It's not going to happen. The economy has tanked, oil and gas has bottomed out. It's not going to be $1 billion anytime soon. It was supposed to be $1 billion within 3 years, okay? So the $320 million that were invested in year one, which was in the 2020 session, and as Senator Lopez alluded to in the special session, we took 20 or 30 million of that because we had to fill the budget. Those 300 million that are left are not for early childhood, okay? And you know, for the candidates on the call today, you'll hear, oh, well, 300 million has been invested. No, not 300 million. $300 million have been placed under the mattress, and what little interest it generates will be invested in early childhood. So, You know, it was a good you know, good try, good push. We welcomed it. You know, I personally voted for it. But it's not going to be $1 billion, and it's not going to yield the kind of money that needs to be yielded. So we're back to square one. We're back to the land grant permanent fund.
Yeah, and I have one more question, and I'd like to have each of you give some final statements on this, and Manny has a statement that he'd like to read as well. But there's been a lot of talk about why stop at 1%, and so you know, I think, you know, listening to this, that is an interesting question. Anybody want to take a shot at that one?
No, I think that's a great question. We've been hammering away at the 1%. So like I said, we may be committed to that, but I think we'd have to do massive education in this state for people to be comfortable with it. People just don't want to do it. I think it would vote better with early childhood than K through 12, although I think K through 12 would pass as well. But it's not going to be an easy road. If we put it on the next general election ballot, that's one thing. The Secretary of State has the legal authority to call for a special election, but there will be tremendous opposition to it, because ultimately, in people's minds, either consciously or subconsciously, it's a downward pressure on taxes. They truly believe the world's going to end. We don't have the capacity as New Mexicans to grow our economy and grow our state, and we need this fund to pay for the next generation of poverty. That's really what their argument is. So it's not going to be easy to pass. If we go 2%, 3%, it would be easier to defeat. But we're going to, polling will tell us that. We'll hopefully get some good information from some polling that some allies of ours are doing to see, and hopefully get some strong support from the executive branch and the treasurer. The state land office is out front on this big time, and the governor's office telling us that if we want generational equity, that magic number is closer to 7.5 than 6.
7.5 sounds beautiful to me.
Because there's what's ironic, there's an inverse correlation between states that have huge permanent funds and the well-being of their children. There's some states that have actually used up their permanent funds and built an economy with it. Arizona went to 6.8, Republican House, Republican Senate, Republican governor went to 6.8 because they had confidence in themselves that those investments were going to pay off. So we need to have confidence in ourselves. We had, thanks to the senator and others, Senator Padilla, we have a cabinet level department for early education. So we have early education, a K through 12, and a higher ed department, and we could build a 21st century economic structure if we had the financial resources, and we do. We just need to take it to the voters.
Thank you for that. Well, let's go ahead and have some closing remarks. Senator Lopez, I'd like to start with you, if I may.
I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation tonight, and I appreciate everybody attending. We need to spread the word out in our communities about how important this particular resolution is and what it will do for our families. It's an investment in us. It's an investment in our children. It's an investment in the future for when we get more of these white ganas coming in. It's our young people that are going to be taking over. And we need to make sure that we give them the tools. Our families need the assistance. Our families need the help. As was mentioned, COVID has opened our eyes to see where the inequities are in our system. It's rural New Mexico, it's Albuquerque, it's all across the state of New Mexico, east, west, north, and south. And it's the right thing to do. And I just make my plea once again, get out and support those candidates. We need to make sure we maintain the Democrat majority. The Senate needs our Democrats. I need them so that we can get this bill done and over to the voter. And then we got to campaign for it. But thank you for having this conversation. Thank you, Flora, Manny, and again, for the public who's joining us. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lopez. It's an honor. Commissioner Garcia Richard.
Wow, it has, you're right, Senator Lopez, it's been a real pleasure this evening. I miss these guys on the House floor, man. Give me chills. You know, I guess I just want to say that COVID has underscored a lot for us at the land office. It's really brought home basically, you know, the fact that everyone who was suffering before the pandemic is now suffering even more during the pandemic. It's brought home that everything we wanted to do and proposed in terms of, you know, protecting our assets, in terms of raising our royalty rates, in terms of, you know, ensuring that we can do everything we can to diversify the land office actually is possible. So even though it has been a crisis, I think it's been a real opportunity. It has pointed out just exactly what our direction should be, what we need to be doing. And, you know, I've always said, why are we not talking about, we always talk about the benefit of this extra distribution. Why aren't we talking about the cost? Like, what is the financial cost in a dollar amount that our kids, our families have missed out on because they haven't had this additional distribution? What is that financial, what's that number? Because I don't think we can talk about equity without knowing the costs that our families have had to bear, the costs that our kids have had to bear, not having this extra money. So I just, you know what, Representatives Maestas and Martinez, you just call us from the land office. We will give you everything you need to support you in this, because we are 100% behind you. We want to invest in our families, our kids. We want to invest in our state. So it's been my real privilege to be here tonight and listen to these guys, and they're so passionate and just makes me so inspired. Thank you.
You inspire us as well. Thank you. Definitely, we appreciate that. Representative Maestas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Vice Chair Crespin, for this fantastic meeting. It's great to see everybody. I hope everybody's doing well. I miss everybody, but I want to thank the Senator for her strength, and the Commissioner Garcia Richard. Her staff has taught me so much about what the land office does and the Land Grant Permanent Fund, and Representative Martinez keeps me going, man. So yeah, we're gonna, the momentum has not waned. Just 3 quick points. One is the relationship between New Mexico and the federal government is unique. The federal government should, you know, handcuffed us 122 years ago. We should take those handcuffs off. Other states with different demographics than ours, their money from state lands goes into their general fund. The federal government saw it fit to put our money into an investment fund. And so think about that for a sec. Lastly, there is no purpose from a legal standpoint. There is no constitutional purpose. Other states have like a purpose. Our Land Grant Permanent Fund is for this. There is no purpose. The purpose is what we as New Mexicans deem appropriate. We have been incredible stewards of our state lands, our Land Grant Investment Fund, and utilized it in a fantastic way. But we can utilize it much, much better. We can increase the investments with smart, targeted early childhood investments and educational programs. And let's just do it. The science is there. The leadership is there in this state. And the fiscal stewardship is there as well in the Senate and the House. So lastly, it's COVID and has allowed us to reimagine. We're reimagining policing, reimagining education. We need to reimagine our state lands, our Land Grant Permanent Fund. Why is there 21 beneficiaries? Why don't we just have one and then hold all the institutions harmless through the budgeting process? Why nothing precludes us from having a state rig where we get 14 cents on the dollar for every dollar of gasoline? Why not get 90 cents on that dollar? Nothing precludes us from doing any of this stuff. And of course, going to wind and solar as fast as the State Land Commissioner is leading us is going to be tremendous. So let's just reach out to each other, learn as much as we can, and give our community the confidence that we as New Mexicans can manage this increased distribution for the benefit of our children, because our children deserve the very, very best. And let's do it for them. All right, thanks.
Thank you for your effort, Mo. Thank you for your tireless work on our behalf. It's amazing, really. Representative Martinez?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Lucero, and Mr. Vice Chair Crespin for putting this together. You've inspired me, and I'm going to float the idea with my colleagues here to do this same panel, maybe through the state party, to get people from every single county engaged in this conversation. You know, I have to say that if not for the leadership of Land Commissioner Garcia Richard and the leadership of Chairwoman Lopez, our bill loses momentum. It's passed the House so many times. The last couple of floor debates, Republicans didn't even really debate us anymore because they knew what the outcome was going to be and they knew what the answers and responses were going to be. But having Commissioner Garcia Richard show up to a committee hearing as the first land commissioner, and not only stand and say I support this, but to state the case in the way that she has been a breath of fresh air, and has been quite a bit of a source of momentum for us. So I want to thank you publicly, Commissioner, and your team for having the courage and the foresight and the commitment to do that. Chairwoman Lopez, as I said, this is expected to pass the House every year, and it's expected to die in the Senate every year. And through your leadership and through your 20+ years in Santa Fe and understanding the process and how things work, you have been able to get us not only in terms of a hearing and given us a space to make these debates and points in a public setting, but every now and then, you've succeeded in getting us out of your committee onto the next one. And you know, I cannot tell you how powerful that has been for this movement. Because if not for that, every year that we lose momentum, that is probably the nail in our coffin. And case in point, this last legislative session, I wasn't even in that committee hearing because I was presenting another bill somewhere else. And much to my surprise, here we are getting out of Senate rules. So, you know, I know Representative Maestas and I, you know, are in the paper and we write the op-eds and whatever, but it's really a team effort. And these two wonderful leaders here, Chairwoman Lopez and Commissioner Garcia Richard, have been a part of that. So I want to acknowledge that. I also want to acknowledge the role of the advocates. We are not here with all of the advocates that have been pushing for this for the last 10 years. Folks at CHI, St. Joseph's Children, Alan Sanchez, Jessa Bunker, New Mexico Voices, Jen Jimenez, Amber Wallen, Bill Jordan, Olay. I mean, it would take me 10 minutes to talk about every single one of them. But all of those folks have been so helpful in keeping this momentum going. Lastly, very few times in politics, especially in the legislative process, do we have an opportunity to take something that is so transformative with such an immediate impact than this. And I believe that the fabulous 5, those Senate candidates that won their primaries, I think a big part of the reason they won was the opposition of most of those other folks to this. And I believe the people of the state are tired of politics as usual, and they want to make that big splash. So I thank you guys. I thank you, Chairwoman, and I thank you, Vice Chair, for your time. I thank all the viewers. You know, we have tremendous participation. So thank you for putting this together. And we will see you on the campaign trail very soon. And we will see you at the press conference when we announce that this proposal is headed to the voters. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Manny, you had some words to say?
Yes, and I just wanted to, from the bottom of my heart, thank you all for being here, and thank you for all the hard work that you do. As you know, 95% of the money that's raised by our state trust goes into the New Mexico Public Education Fund. You know, Commissioner Garcia Richard was elected on this promise to leverage the mandate of the office to make more money and to ensure that a better future for New Mexico kids is possible. And with the help of all the leaders, you know, we're trying to work towards that vision to make it possible. As the first educator to serve on the land commissioner and the former chairwoman of the House of Education Committee, and being a big leader in this, you know that Garcia Richard is uniquely qualified to do that, as well as our leaders. You know, we have one of the largest funds in the country, and yet, you know, our children still fall behind. You know, New Mexico was ranked last in child well-being, second to the last in child hunger, and first in a survey of the worst places to raise a child. We can do better, and the money that is raised in our state trust lands will help us to ensure that we turn this corner for our communities and for our entire state. Our leaders and Commissioner Garcia Richard is the first commissioner in history to support legislation to use the land grant permanent fund for early childhood education. And study after study proves that the benefits of early childhood education not only improve the lives of children and families, but also our economy as well. Our leaders have been working diligently, hammering out the hard work on this. And the bottom line is that we need these funds. So please help our leaders to spread this message of how important these financial resources really are. And let's just continue to get the word out. Let's help our leaders get the word out. Let's get the vote out, and let's help the future of our great state of New Mexico out. And thank you again for being here from the bottom of our heart, from the DPBC leadership team. And just thank you for all the hard work that you do and continue to do. Thank you again, everybody, for being here.
Thank you, Manny, very much. And thank you to all the attendees who have joined us. And we're counting on each of you, if you're running for office, to follow through and help with this. And if you're there to vote for these fine legislators that are here with us today, and to also vote for the other ones who have put their websites in the chat. If you'd like to copy this chat, you can go to the bottom of the chat box. There's 3 dots, 3 ellipses, and hover over that. It says more. Click Save Chat, and it'll save it to your local hard drive so you can pull it up later if there's something you'd like to copy and paste. Brian Colon has shared a lot of really good resources with us, as have our panelists. And I cannot tell you how grateful I am for each one of you for the work you are doing day in and day out on our behalf to make New Mexico a shining example of the place that we all want to be and be proud of. And we are so lucky to have each of you in the positions that you are in, working on our behalf. So thank you. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for sharing your insight, your knowledge. Let's do this. Let's do it. Thank you. Have a wonderful night, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.